Hi, I just wanted to introduce this wonderful new instrument to you. This is a wind controller, and a wind controller is something that you use to play MIDI music on a software synth. My interest is actually to introduce more of this instrument. This is called Warble. This is an open hole wind controller. What that means is that it emulates open hole instruments like I'm talking about the Indian instruments like the flute, Shehnai, Nadaswaram, this kind of open hole instruments. And this, in contrast to the other wind controllers, for example, I have one of these wind controllers. This is an Akai EWI 5000, which is also a wind controller. But in contrast to Warble, the way these work is that they don't sense the way you're approaching the hole. That is, they do not sense your distance, the distance of your finger from your touch point, right? So it's either on or off. That's one thing. And then if you are bending the note by slowly moving towards that, you have other compensation mechanisms to use than actually sensing the distance of the finger as you're gradually closing. That's how these wind controllers behave. This one, as well as the wind controller from Yamaha, which is more key based. The other part is this one does not sense the octave jump by your pressure, the mouthpiece pressure here. So you blow through this, and this one does not jump the octave by the overblowing mechanism. Instead, it uses a set of rollers here, which you need to operate with your thumb to move either up or down as you're moving your pitch up or down, right? That's how this operates. It's a great instrument. However, in contrast, how Warble works is that there are holes here, actually physical holes if you see here, and then there are sensors here which sense as you are opening and closing your fingers. The sensors sense as you're approaching and as you're moving away, thereby creating that bend and that smooth flow between notes, which all open hole instruments do, including the Indian open hole instruments such as Bansuri, Shehnai, Nadaswaram, and such. The mean and the gamak are so inherent to Indian music. You can easily produce those on this instrument because it's an open hole instrument, number one. Number two, if you know flute, for example, or if you know Shehnai, for example, then you can just use that fingering as is without having to do anything else to play a song. So whereas if you want to adapt this instrument for Shehnai style of playing or the Indian Bansuri style of playing, then you have to adapt a little bit to the fingering patterns that you have on this instrument, because just like they cannot sense the open, as you're opening and closing, they cannot sense that continuity, they cannot sense half holes either. So you do not have the half hole concept in this. In order to play a semitone, you have to use a combination of keys like a western flute or like a saxophone, and you can choose what sort of fingering you want. So you do have to learn a different sort of fingering and get used to that on this sort of wind control, like the Akai sort of wind controller. However, on this one, because this is sensing your fingers as you move, you can even do half holing. So you can produce those semitones using half holing. So which means you don't have to really learn a new fingering in order to play this instrument. That's the second thing. The other thing that you notice in this is that you can simply play the higher octave by overblowing into the mouth hole. Just like you do on a flute or an Nadaswaram or a Shehnai, you just change your embouchure and then your pressure here in order to create that higher octave sound on this instrument. So net, all in all, what it is doing is without having to learn a number of new things, new fingerings, and without having to get used to all those, you can pretty much transfer what you know on an open hole instrument onto this very easily. That's what I like about this instrument, and it has lots of configurations. You need to figure out the right configuration, the right sound that's needed for you, and also note that because this is a wind controller, it does not have a sound of its own. It's just a mere controller. So in what you've heard, I was using a Swarm Oboe instrument on GarageBand. So that's what I was using, but you could choose a saxophone or some other instrument, and the Swarm instruments are very good physically modeled instruments. So a combination of Warble and Swarm works great for me. There are other instruments, soft instruments also, which you could play with Warble. And it's connected through a cable to my software device, which is running on an iPad. So that's my setup. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that the holes on the original Warble were a bit smaller, and I reached out to the manufacturer. It's Andrew Mowry. So Andrew Mowry was kind enough to let me try with a slightly larger holed version here, which is giving me sufficient haptic feedback on my fingers, so I know where my fingers are at any point, so that I'm able to really do the half holing fairly well, right? Still, this is, no way comparable to a real acoustic open hole instrument. So they are great. So if you're able to play an open hole acoustic instrument, great, continue to do that. But at the same time, if you want to expand your music palette to other sounds and other possibilities, and then experiment with MIDI, and you want to transfer your open hole music instrument skills with least resistance and with least learning onto such a wind controller, I would highly recommend this thing. And I would think this is the beginning. As these instruments mature, and as the soft instruments as well, the models, the physical models mature as well, this will improve from where it is now. So in the future, you'll have instruments that are a lot more like the real acoustic instruments. Until then, this is great, and we can have a lot of fun with this instrument. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to try this, you can go to warble.xyz. That's the website, and the website I'll leave it in the description. It's WARBL warble.xyz. That's the website from which you can purchase this instrument. Wonderful. Have a great time playing MIDI wind controllers.